Hey, welcome again to our show. Have you heard about contracts? Have you heard about the word contract? Because in our day-to-day activities, we encounter the word contract, but people may not understand what is the contract. So contract is mostly about agreement between parties. That can be two-person, three-person. So that's the agreement between people. And before you go into an agreement, which is considered as contract, there should be some level of understanding. There should be or legality. When we say legality, the subject matter of that contract should be legal. You cannot go into a contract with a subject matter that is not legal. If it happens like that, then the contract is invalid. So, what do we mean if we say your subject matter should be legal? For example, if I goes into a contract with a person and that contract subject matter is drugs, when we carry on the transactions of drugs or the contracts of drugs, and after the transaction there is misunderstanding, the court cannot talk into such a contract because the contract is illegal. So before you go into a contract, your subject matter should be legal. And on contracts, there are other things embedded. Like when it comes to being under pressure, because sometimes people are under pressure to go into a contract. And when you are under pressure going into a contract, that contract is not valid. So before you go into a contract, the contract should be willingly and the contract should be legal. Because if I'm not willing to go into a contract, if I do go into a contract, that contract is considered void. So there are so many questions on contract. People started to ask, what is about contract? Contract is very huge because nowadays the entire world is running on a contract. It's going on an agreement. You must agree before you go into a contract. Let's take for example where I was talking about under the influence. If you go into a contract with a military man who use his influence to take you into the contract, that contract is considered illegal. And sometimes there is another thing we call the protocol contract. Under the protocol contract or protocol agreement is where an adult is not in his sound mind or an adult is misusing his property and a concerned citizen takes the complaint to a court that XYZ is misusing his property. When the law assigns a guardian on that person who's misusing his or her property, that person has no right to sell or go into any contract without the concern of his guardian. So you can be old enough, you can be young and still have a guardian. That is where a guardianship comes in. If an incompetency takes place within a contract, that contract is also considered invalid. You should have competency in your contract. You should have your free will. You shouldn't be pushed against the wall to go into a contract. The contract will be considered invalid. And the contract should be legal. We always talk about legal. Let's take, for example, if I gave a drugs to a person to sell that drugs, and I will give him certain percentage of the money earned from the drugs. The person sold the drugs, but The one who gives the drugs for sale did not pay the person who sells the drugs. If there is a misunderstanding like that, that the person wasn't paid, if that person who wasn't paid takes the complaint to the court cannot talk for you because the transaction you carry on is illegal. Those are the things. And sometimes people misunderstand witnessing. In a contract, there should always be a witness, but not at all times. Because you will go into a contract where you don't have witness at the moment, but there are some advices that will protect you when you go into a contract that doesn't have witnesses. Number one, always write your contract terms and conditions because that is how the court will judge a case when there is misunderstanding between the offerer and the offeree. So if we say offerer and offeree, the offerer is the person who offers a contract and the offeree is the person who accepts the contract. When there is an argument or misunderstanding between the offeree and the offerer, there is a document that is provided to really understand the argument. That document is what you write during your contract. Do not go into a contract that is not written. Sometimes oral contract is good, but it is always better to go into a contract that is written because that document can be used against the person who will cause the misunderstanding. So back to what I was saying about witnesses. So if you go into a contract without a witness, my advice to you is to take that document that was written to a notary, a legal notary, a private or a public. Go and notarize the document. If one of the parties say that I didn't agree to this contract, they will look at the notarized document to say, this is your signature, and this document is notarized, telling the public that this is legal. So that's one advice. Another advice is to take the document to the forensic. Forensic agency are people who will detect the fingerprints because if you write a document, you will touch the document. If you touches the document, your fingerprints will remain on the document. So if you don't have witness within that contract, you can take your document to the forensic agency and they do a fingerprint scan on it. So if they scan it to find the fingerprint, that will prove that this person, XYZ, wrote this document as a legal contract. So contract really cause so many of confusion because people don't want to be fair to each other. And at the end of the day, the contract brings confusion. So that's another one. And next to that, factors that leads to invalid contract. How can a contract be invalid? What are those factors? And under that contract, or let's say on a contract as a whole, there is a mistake made. If a mistake is made within a contract, that contract is considered invalid. How can a mistake be made in a contract? If, for example, you go to a store to buy a certain thing, the seller, when the seller gives you the wrong item, that contract is invalid because the item you went for is not the item you got. So it becomes invalid. That's why there are two mistakes. Number one is a mutual mistake, and the other one is a unilateral mistake. Under the mutual mistake is where the both party made a mistake. If both of us made a mistake within a contract, if we don't follow the principles, the policies of contract, it becomes mutual mistake and it leads to invalidation of contract. And for the unilateral mistake is where one party made a mistake, where the seller gives the wrong goods to the buyer. Under that contract, it is a unilateral mistake. And the next one is misrepresentation. If a contract is misrepresented, if the ideas of the contract does not go directly with the policy of law, what happens? The contract becomes invalid. So the contract should always be a representable contract, not a misrepresentable contract. And we have jurors. Under the jurors is where you are under the influence or there is a circumstances that leads to that contract. If someone point a gun at you and they say, let us go into this contract or else I will pull this trigger. Under that contract, the law consider it as invalid because you were under the influence of a gun. The law cannot consider such a contract. It is invalid because being under an influence, you can do anything that you are not certified to do. So that can be considered as invalid contract. The major one is the illegality. Always, at all time, your subject matter should be legal. You cannot go into a contract with an illegal attempt and you feel that you can take that case to the court and the court talk for you. You will always be the loser because the court cannot talk for you. The court will not play for you because the items or the item in that contract is illegal and it is against the law. So always go into a contract that is a bad law that contain illegal materials or items. And there are types of juries: physical and improper trade. And lastly, there are two types of juries. Number one is the physical juries, and the second one is the improper. So the physical juries is where people physically or fakes are gone at you, or you are under a physical influence, and the person tells you to sign the contract. That contract is considered invalid. And the last one is the improper. So under the improper threats is where someone threatens you that if you do not sign this contract, I will do this to you, or threats. If you are under a threat, it is considered invalid. In Africa, we have that problem. We really experience that. When it comes to marriage, under marriage, there are most tribes, there are most countries that force their children to go into a marriage with a person they do not love. So if a person is underage and you expect that person to go into a marriage with a man above her age, they consider that marriage valid under our African culture. But when it comes to law, that marriage is invalid because the person did not agree to the terms of the marriage. Most tribes are involved in that. They take their children, their girls' children, and send them into a home where the man is married to women, like 5, 6 women, and they want to take that young girl into that home, let's say she does not like the idea, but she must go there because her family threatened her that if you cannot go into this marriage, you will leave this family. We will not recognize you. You will not acquire this property. Your name will change. All those threats, it is considered invalid. But in Africa, our African parents, especially certain tribe, consider that it is wrong under the law. You cannot influence people to carry on something that is not right. So thank you again for today, and we hope to see you on another show. Keep subscribing.